The movie opens in the year 1480 in Romania, where we see a prince named Vlad and his beloved wife Elisabeta. The couple seems madly in love as they play a music box and make love within the huge castle. However, their intimate moment is interrupted when some soldiers approach Prince Vlad and ask him to lead the fight against the Ottomans. Next, Vlad prepares for the battle, but before leaving, he goes to the church to receive the blessing of the priest. Vlad says he is willing to maintain his faith, but the only thing he asks from God is to protect his wife, as he cannot imagine his life without her. The priest also assures him that nothing will happen to the princess, and that he will pray for her safety. Following this, Vlad and his men head to the battlefield, where they clash with the enemy in a brutal battle and manage to emerge victorious. However, the celebration doesn't last long, as Vlad receives news that Elisabeta's life is in danger, with enemies following her. The prince immediately rushes to save her, while Elisabeta is seen trying to flee from her pursuers through an area filled with bear traps. She eventually falls into one, but fortunately, Vlad also arrives and manages to kill the enemies. He swings his sword at the last man and kills him, but in the process, he ends up injuring Elisabeta as well. Panicked, Vlad rushes to save his wife, but it is already too late, and she soon succumbs to her injuries. This loss devastates the prince, prompting him to return to the priest in fury and accuse God of failing to protect Elisabeta. He demands that she be returned to him, but the priest insists that it doesn't work that way. However, consumed by grief, Vlad renounces God and kills the priest in an act of vengeance. At this moment, lightning flashes, and the statue of Christ begins to cry, but Vlad looks proud of his actions. The scene then cuts to 400 years later in France, where we meet a doctor named Dumont, who summons a priest to investigate an unusual case. They go to see an Italian woman named Maria, who is locked in a dark room and has been behaving aggressively. Dr. Dumont reveals that Maria is the fiancée of the Queen's grandson, Henry, but on her wedding day, she refused to enter the church and began acting frantically upon seeing a priest. This shocks the priest, and when they check her birth records, they are horrified to see the year 1759, proving that she must be over 120 years old. The priest theorizes that she is a vampire, and to confirm this, he opens a window, after which the sunlight starts to burn Maria's skin. He then raises a cross, but Maria easily turns it into flames and begins laughing maniacally. The priest then asks her to be honest about what she is, and even gives her a drop of blood to gain her trust. Upon tasting the blood, Maria reveals that she serves her master, who has come to Paris in search of his princess. The scene then cuts to late at night, where we see a notary named Jonathan arriving at a spooky castle. There, he meets an old man who looks deathly pale and introduces himself as Prince Vlad, also known as Count Dracula. The two sit down for dinner, during which Jonathan begins eating the delicious food, but Dracula doesn't eat anything. While the notary is distracted, Dracula kills a rat and begins drinking its blood. Jonathan then explains the purpose of his visit, revealing that his client wants to buy one of Dracula's properties in Paris to convert it into a hospital. However, Dracula says they will discuss the matter in the morning, and offers the notary a guest room but warns him not to leave his room at night. Dracula then begins playing a music box in the living room, while Vlad snoops around and finds a book about Prince Vlad's history, but there is a missing page from which Elisabeta's picture has been ripped out. Elsewhere, Dr. Dumont and the priest visit a worried Henry and inform him that they're working on removing evil from Maria. The priest then proceeds to inspect Maria's room, during which he finds the missing page with Elisabeta's picture, and deduces that this must be the princess the vampire has been searching for. Meanwhile, Jonathan sneaks out of his room late at night and wanders around the castle. He soon comes across a coffin, which he opens, and is horrified to find Dracula sleeping inside. Dracula says he shouldn't have left his room when a gargoyle suddenly appears out of nowhere and knocks out Jonathan. Sometime later, Jonathan wakes up and finds himself chained by several gargoyles. Dracula says he's going to kill him and asks what his last wish is, to which Jonathan responds that he wants to hear his story. Dracula agrees and begins telling how, 400 years ago, he and his wife, Elisabeta, were in love and happy until she died unexpectedly. After that, Dracula renounced God and tried to end his life several times, but he failed. It turns out that because of his offense, God punished him with immortality and made him a vampire. However, Dracula was convinced that Elisabeta would be reincarnated because she had a pure soul. He then desperately searched for her for hundreds of years, but to no avail. To draw her to him, he spent all his money and energy creating a perfume that would instantly seduce any woman around him. He traveled the world and sprinkled the perfume everywhere, and while women were always drawn to him, he could never find Elisabeta. One day, Dracula attended a party in Versailles, where he was convinced he would find Elisabeta, but once again he came up empty-handed. The man became increasingly frustrated, so he ended up using his perfume to hypnotize the women. He then attacked them one by one to suck their blood, and Maria was his first victim. Dracula turned them into vampires as well, and they all became his servants after that. While his servants brought him immense wealth, they could never find the most important thing, which was Elisabetta. Upon hearing this, Jonathan begs Dracula to spare his life, explaining that he also has a fiancée whom he loves dearly. The vampire wonders if he is telling the truth, so to prove it, Jonathan gives him a locket containing a picture of his fiancée. However, Dracula's eyes widen in shock when he realizes that the woman looks exactly like his Elisabetta. Jonathan insists that she is his fiancée, Mina, but Dracula thinks she is his wife reincarnated. The excited vampire decides to spare Jonathan's life since he brought Elisabetta to him, and instead just locks him up. Following this, Dracula asks the gargoyles to bring him all the fresh blood they can, because he needs to look handsome to meet his princess. Back at the hospital, the priest gives the doctor Elisabetta's old portrait and says they need to find this woman before the vampire does. At this moment, a young intern arrives and says that the woman in the picture is waiting outside the office. Dr. Dumont and the priest immediately go to see her, and they are stunned to find that she looks exactly like Elisabetta, and she introduces herself as Mina. Mina then explains that she is there to see Maria, who turns out to be her friend. The two women had met just a few days ago at Maria's wedding, and immediately became close friends. Maria became strangely fascinated with Mina, and took her to another room where they played and laughed together. Maria seemed normal, until suddenly, the priest showed up, after which she went out of control. Mina also explains that she attended the wedding because of her fiancé, but for some reason, she doesn't seem happy with him. She claims that she feels like she belongs to a different era, which becomes confirmation for the doctor and the priest that she's the reincarnation of Elisabetta. Elsewhere, Dracula disguises himself as a homeless man and begs a nun for some food, so the kind woman takes him inside a convent. However, once inside, he suddenly takes out his perfume and hypnotizes the nuns before sucking their blood. Meanwhile, Jonathan, who is still trapped in the castle, makes a makeshift rope from some sheets and begins lowering himself out of the window. He lands on a frozen lake just as the gargoyles spot him and immediately begin chasing him. However, since the gargoyles are heavier, they are afraid to step onto the ice for fear of sinking, which allows Jonathan to escape. In another scene, Dracula arrives at the building where Maria is locked up and uses his perfume to make everyone surrender. He then thanks Maria for finding his beloved and even gives her a young boy to quench her thirst, which makes the woman very excited. Sometime later, Mina is at home when she is visited by Maria, who claims that she has been discharged from the hospital. She seems unusually energetic and invites Mina out so she can introduce her to a friend. A confused Mina agrees, and after getting ready, the two women arrive at a grand hotel where a huge party is going on. Dracula is patiently waiting for his beloved, and upon seeing her, he is completely mesmerized. Maria then introduces the two, after which she leaves them alone to spend some time together. Later, Dracula takes Mina to a room, where he shows her the same music box from 400 years ago. He then plays their favorite melody, which begins to trigger memories from Mina's past life. Dracula explains that it belonged to his late wife, and she used to play this melody whenever she wanted him. He tells Mina that she looks exactly like his late wife, and gives her the music box, leaving the woman confused. After spending a lovely time together, Dracula drops Mina off at her home, but as she enters, she is shocked to see a beaten-up Jonathan there, along with Dr. Dumont and the priest. They explain how Jonathan was kidnapped by Count Dracula, who is actually a vampire that has destroyed the lives of many people, including Maria. However, Mina finds this impossible to believe, as the man she met seemed like a true gentleman and charming. Next, Mina goes to her room, where she begins listening to the music box and experiences glimpses of memories from her past life. Then, all of a sudden, Dracula magically appears in the room, which terrifies her. He explains that she is his wife from 400 years ago and reincarnated, but Mina refuses to believe him. However, when he gently takes her hand, Mina suddenly begins to recall her past more vividly and finally sees the truth. She becomes very happy to meet him again, and the two share a passionate kiss. Mina then asks Dracula to turn her into a vampire so they can be together forever, to which he obliges and bites her. Meanwhile, in the living room, the priest senses that something is wrong, so they immediately go to Maria's room, only to find it empty. They believe that Dracula must have kidnapped Mina and decide to go to Romania, but before that, they decide to find Maria first. Elsewhere, Maria arrives at her fiancé Henry's house, claiming that she is fine now, and begins seducing him. She is about to bite him when, all of a sudden, the priest's group arrives and shoots her, but it has no effect on the vampire. Maria then grabs the priest by the neck and squeezes with great force, just as Jonathan takes a sword and decapitates her. However, her body continues to fight, so the priest uses a nail to drive it into her chest, which finally ends Maria's life. The scene then cuts to the castle in Romania, where Dracula and Mina are seen very happy and ready for a new beginning. Dracula is advised by his followers that others are aware of their location and that it would be safer to leave, but the vampire refuses. Soon enough, the doctor, Henry, and Jonathan arrive with some Romanian soldiers and surround the castle. They are armed with crosses, stakes, and even holy water, and they approach Dracula's coffin, which they begin to shoot relentlessly. However, the coffin turns out to be empty, and Dracula soon attacks Jonathan from behind and knocks him unconscious. Despite having more advanced weapons, the soldiers are overpowered by Dracula and his gargoyles. In the end, Dracula comes face to face with the priest, where the vampire vents all his resentment and blames God for taking his wife from him. The priest then begs him to think about Mina and explains that by turning her into a vampire, he is keeping her under the same curse that had tormented him for 400 years. The priest reassures him that if he repents of his actions and begs God for salvation, he will be relieved of the curse. After that, all the victims he had turned into vampires would return to their former selves, including Mina. After a moment of deep reflection, Dracula realizes that the priest is right, and he cannot drag Elisabetta into the dark world he has inhabited for centuries. He approaches his beloved one last time, while Mina cries and begs him not to leave her. With a heavy heart, Dracula bids her farewell and locks her in the room before facing the priest. The priest then chants powerful holy verses and drives a stake into Dracula's heart with a hammer, causing the vampire to collapse. The curse is finally broken, and he is transformed into an old, frail man, while all the vampires return to their original human forms. Afterwards, a distraught Mina drags his body into the room and demands to know why he did this to himself. Dracula explains that he did it all for her, and just then, the sunrise pours into the room, causing him to turn to dust. Outside, a group of children emerges from the castle, who turn out to be gargoyles that were serving Dracula. In the final scene, Mina continues to cry over Dracula's ashes when Jonathan approaches her and tries to talk, but she doesn't pay him much attention, so the man quietly walks away from her as the movie comes to an end.